up? It's Cass Kim. I'm here to talk to you today about writing effective dialogue. Dialogue is really important in writing a novel or even a short story because this is how you're going to keep the pace up. This is how you're going to make your characters feel real. You're going to really be able to expose relationships and motivations through how they create their dialogue, how they talk to each other, interact with other people. Dialogue is probably one of the most important parts of a story to make it feel real. So, number one, the first thing that I would say is rare to no monologues. Right now I'm talking to you in a monologue because this is a YouTube video and I'm the only one here in the room, aside from the dog, who is not going to comment because she's sleeping like usual. But in general life, when you're talking with your friends, when you're talking with your family, you're interrupting each other, right? I mean, I know it's rude to interrupt, but let's be realistic, we always do. And then also, it's a back and forth. It's a conversation, right? It's not like we speak in like these monologue chunks and then they speak in a monologue chunk and then we speak in a monologue chunk. Even when we text, we don't text like that usually, right? Because it's like, right? It's not too often. Sometimes it is. But I would say there are some genres where you can have a monologue and it does work, but you shouldn't have it frequently. And that would be maybe an epic fantasy where somebody who's greatly respected and therefore isn't going to get interrupted has to do some kind of big reveal or some background stuff that's going to impact the overall story. But I would still say, depending on the length of that monologue, you can still interrupt the monologue, not necessarily with other dialogue, but maybe with character internal reactions or shifting or gasping or some kind of reaction. Just because if you're reading like 2 pages of straight monologue from a character, you're going to lose the realism of it. At that point, you might as well do some kind of flashback or something, right? If you're not having other characters' reactions. So just keep that in mind. When we speak, it's an interaction. It's not a monologue to monologue. So number 2, I want to talk a little bit about the M dash. So I did say that we interrupt each other a lot, and we do. So there's a special character for when dialogue is like abruptly interrupted, and that's called an M dash, EM dash. I'll put one up there. Well, I won't actually put one up there because I don't know how to do that in this editing. But when you go to Word, it's insert symbols, and then you can select the M dash. You can search for it. You can also add it in Google Docs. It's just a little bit trickier. But the M dash is actually more appropriate than just the typical dash that's on your keyboard. It's a little bit longer. That's really the only difference that I can see. So the M dash is used, for example, if you're interrupting somebody. So if I'm starting to say a sentence and then somebody cuts me off, you would M dash that instead of comma or period. M dash what I said and then start their stuff in the next paragraph. Also, you can use M dashes. I think it's a stylistic choice to use M dashes versus commas for actions interacting dialogue. So if I'm talking and I pause to think, or I stop to show something before I start talking again, and I'm interrupting my own sentence to do it, you can use the M dash, or you can use comma separating it. I would say, depending on how much interruption your characters do with each other, would probably be your most informational choice about whether to use the M dash or the commas, because M dashes should not be like prolific throughout your text. They should be used a little bit sparingly. You don't want to see an M dash every single sentence or every couple sentences. It does get, it just wears on the eyes a little bit because we're much more used to seeing and ignoring commas as a typical part of punctuation. So M dash for verbal interruptions for sure, and then M dash or commas for physical interruptions, depending on how you want to play it. Number 3, decrease repetition. So this would be like when something happens and then your characters are coming back together because maybe this one was over here doing something and it comes back to the group, and that character needs to tell their friends like, oh, hey, so this is what happened. If you're going to directly rehash what happened, I think you can skip that. You can just say, so-and-so explained, blah, 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 and that's it. But I think the point of rehashing something in dialogue when you're talking in a group would be if maybe they're holding something back, or if it does something else that informs about the character, like if the way a certain character reacts is different than you might expect or kind of strange, then you could kind of play that out in a way that shows that off. But if you're just going to rehash exactly what happened in the previous chapter, or, you know, if you're going to spend like 6 lines of dialogue rehashing it and you're not giving us new information, whether it's how your character is saying it or how somebody else is reacting, you can cut that because that's filler. Your audience just read that. They don't need to reread it in dialogue. So I would say, unless you're giving new information, don't rehash previous activities in the dialogue. If you are giving new information, it's totally useful. All right, number 4, dialect. So I would say use specific dialect sparingly if it's going to be distracting. So if it's like when you're writing a character and they speak a specific way, maybe they're super gruff or they're like kind of like, I don't know, they just speak a very different way than the rest of the characters. I would say you can write it a little bit heavy at first just to give that picture and like have the character notice it or something. But then I would think you would lean more on colloquialisms versus writing it, because if you're writing a thick, heavy accent, every single thing that they say, it's going to get old really fast for your readers, especially if it's thick enough that they have to think about what they actually are saying. You know, you don't want your dialogue to be distracting. You want your dialogue to be fun and entertaining, and you want it to give your characters depth and give your story emotional depth, but you don't want it to be distracting from the actual purpose of the dialogue, which is all of that emotional stuff that's contained within it. So if somebody has a pretty significant dialect difference compared to the other characters, maybe start it out a little bit strong and then fade it out, and you can put it here and there, sprinkle it, but mostly use colloquialisms from what they might say based on where they're from, their area. And that's how you can set them apart and show off that dialect without hampering your actual dialogue. And then number 5, tagging and beats. So I know there's a lot of stuff about, don't tag everything with he muttered, he shouted, he exclaimed, right? You can tag with said and it gets just kind of ignored by the reader, and that's totally fine. I'm not here to tell you how you need to tag your dialogue. I'm just going to tell you that to an extent you do need to at least demonstrate who's speaking, whether you direct tag or not. So if you have line of dialogue, line of dialogue, line of dialogue, and you don't have anything else with it, yeah, we might be able to follow the beats, but if I have to look back through and count the beats to know who's speaking, that's a problem. That's going to distract from my reading. It's going to get confusing, especially if maybe somebody like starts and stops, right? Because it throws off the whole beat rhythm. So what I would recommend is, if you're not comfortable tagging it, you don't want to use said, you don't want to have somebody exclaim for like the 50th time that chapter, you can just end the dialogue and then say my character's name is Jonathan. I could have Jonathan's dialogue like, oh, it's really nice to see you today, period, end quote. And then I could just talk about what Jonathan is doing. So I could say, Jonathan ran a hand through his hair, looking away from her. And then she could speak. Something like that. So you don't necessarily have to direct tag, but you do have to do something intermittently to keep your dialogue clear. I want to know who's speaking without guessing. If it's a thought versus a spoken dialogue, I want to not have to look back and reread it as a thought. So if you're putting your thoughts for your characters in quotes, just like your dialogue, make sure you tag it as a thought, like to herself she said, or in her head she thought, before you put that dialogue thought, because I don't want to have to go back and reread it and be like, why is nobody reacting to that? I can't believe she said that out loud. Oh, he thought that in his head. Oh, let me reread that now so that I read it in my internal thinking voice instead of my external speech voice for this character. And then also think about beats when you're writing. So if you're writing somebody's dialogue and the person that they're speaking to reacts to it, you're going to put that in a separate line. That is a beat, right? So speech, character who said the speech, whatever their reaction or physical thing might be if they have one. And then next character's reaction. Even if I'm not having that second character speak, if they're reacting in a way that informs the dialogue or informs the readers, if they're reacting in any visible way, I'm going to put that in a separate line as a different beat, almost like it's their own kind of dialogue. It's their nonverbal dialogue. So characters speak, anything that goes in that same line as dialogue needs to be only from that character. And then the next line would be a different character's reaction or a different character's response in any way, whether it's verbal or nonverbal. And then you would go back to the next speaking character, whether it's that character from above or if it's a different character. If it's this person who's reacting here, you would just put their dialogue and their reaction in the same line, unless there's like a whole lot of physical stuff that's going to get confusing and your dialogue's going to be like 3 lines down. So I hope that makes sense, the whole beats thing. If you have questions, you can always talk to me about it on Twitter. It's at CassKim_writes. You can also hit me up on Instagram, Cass_Kim_book_coach, or you can always email me, CassKim@CassKim.com. I am a line editor, so this is something I spend a lot of time working on with my clients. Because dialogue is just such a key piece of a story. If you don't have dialogue that feels real, that reads real, you're going to lose some of your readers' investment in your story. And that's the most important thing you can have from a reader, is that emotional investment in your story. That's what's going to keep them coming back for more. That's what's going to make it hard to set that book down. You can have the coolest plot in the world, but if you don't have the supporting characters and the supporting dialogue to really make that plot sing, it's just not going to be the book it could be. And I know that you want your best book. All right, have a great day. Thanks for sticking in with me. Bye.